All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar today, where we'll be discussing how to fund your transformational observability and security projects using our budget proposal toolkit. Before I turn it over to our presenter for today, just a few housekeeping reminders. All participants are automatically placed on mute. We also encourage you to ask questions by using the Q&A section below. We will answer as many questions as we can live and follow up on any questions we may not get to. Now I'd like to introduce your presenter for today, Ed Bailey, Senior Technical Evangelist at Cribl. Ed, do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself?
Hi, how are you doing? And thank you for everyone's time. My name's Ed Bailey. I've technical evangelist for Cribl. I was one of Cribl's first customers when I was working at TransUnion, and I'm thrilled to be here today to share the magic of asking for money. It's pretty exciting. I think this is something that's crucial for every engineer and architect as you're looking to grow and move up in the world. I'm thrilled to see so many people are attending. So this is the most common thing in the world. Engineers, architects, you know what your problems are. You usually know how you want to fix them. The struggle is how to make your project real, how to get it funded. This is a crucial skill set. And this is also as you're going through your technical education, if you're going to college for computer science or math, or you're doing it the hard way by working your way up from support to administration to engineering, this is not something you get taught. There's no computer science class on funding and budgeting. There's no computer science class on the magic of enterprise politics. And so this is why I just wanted to try to share some ideas about how to make your ideas real, how to solve problems. And also this is something super important. If you want to get above engineer, if you want to get to architect, if you want to get to principal, the primary difference in being a really good engineer but being a really good architect or a really good leader is being able to herd the cats, to be able to get your ideas out into the enterprise and to sell it. And so that it's a different set of skills than you're used to with engineering. But this is the real difference. If you want to rise above individual contributor, this is a great way to get started. It's how you build credibility in your business, and it's how you create real change. Within the agenda, I'm going to talk about asking for money. I'm going to talk about also how businesses ascribe business outcomes or value. We're going to map some technical requirements of business value. Then we're going to put it all together. We're going to go through kind of a very simple way of creating a budget, of estimating ROI, and then telling a story to management about why this is so important. Also, please, if you have questions, we'll have Q&A at the end, but please ask your questions. I want to make sure that people get the information they need. So I love the statement about money is the root of all evil, but the lack of it will kill your project. I don't care how good of a technical idea you have, that if it doesn't get funded, if it doesn't have time allocated to it, then it simply doesn't matter. It is so important to be able to advocate for your ideas, and if you're a manager, work with your manager, work with your budget holders, and in order to make something real. Your proposals need to be brief and need to be focused. And this is so important. Remember your audience. So you're going to have the idea that, okay, I have to convince my manager that this is important. And so you're going to have a mix of your technical arguments, of your organizational arguments. But ultimately, in most organizations, your budget holder is going to be high enough up that they don't necessarily understand, or be honest with you, necessarily care about the technical arguments. What they want to do, what they want to know is, what are the business outcomes? What are the business outcomes? How is what you're going to do improve the business, move the business forward, lower risk? And we'll talk about that some more. But it's crucial that when you have these conversations to remember who your audience is. It's also critically important that you tell a story to your audience that emphasizes how the project will solve problems, achieve business outcomes, and then you relate it to what your audience cares about. And so these are just different things to think about. It's not hard, but it's a different way of thinking. We have one of our poll questions first. What's the hardest part about your budget planning process? Is it the lack of transparency? Is it that your manager won't support you? Is it understanding the accounting, or you don't understand the accounting? Cheryl's going to share out the budget, the polling question in a minute. We'd love to get everyone's feedback, because I think this is a crucial issue, and we want to help you. Because this is not something that's necessarily related to Cribl products, but this is something I feel we help our community grow as engineers, no matter what they're doing, and understanding the budget process is crucial. So please give us your feedback. If we don't have the right answers to this question, please share them in the Q&A, because this is something that's crucial. We want your feedback. I want to be, when I do this webinar again, in the near future, that we're answering questions and we're helping you move forward.
Yeah, the poll is live. We do have people responding. Do you have a guess which one you think folks are going to select?
My executive is going to be executive communication and aligning with organizational priorities, and probably be my guess.
Yeah.
There can be a real disconnect in organizations between who the budget holder is and the people with the ideas. And that's where that middle management, initial management leadership is so important. But it's frankly, it's tough. I mean, typically your line managers are engineers who've been promoted, and they may not have those skills either. And so it's a tough place to be. So I'm always interested to see what the results are.
All right. Well, here are the results.
Yeah, I think budget allocation is true. Sometimes in organizations, there's just not a lot of transparency on what is the budget, how much money is available, who has the money, and what exactly are the organizational priorities. So the first thing you want to talk about, and this is probably one of the more common things, more common things that people get tripped up on, is cost savings versus cost avoidance. Always remember, cost savings is lowering your existing level of spend. So, for example, if I'm spending $1 million on Splunk this year, cost savings would be I'm spending $900,000 next year. Cost avoidance is something different, where you're going to say, my average growth, I'll lay this out in a little more detail. My average growth with Splunk is, say, 45%. So next year I'll spend, say, instead of 1 million, it'll be 1.4 million. Cost avoidance is having a flat renewal and avoiding that future cost. So instead of 45%, I have 10%. So it's 1.1 million instead of 1.4. So I'm avoiding that cost in the future. And we'll talk about why it's really critical to understand this difference. And this is where we implement it again. So you implement Cribl Stream, you change your logging requirements, and you log 15% less overall. And so you renew your Splunk license for less data volume next year, you spend less money. So my current spend is $10. My planned growth without would be $14.50. Planned growth with is $1.50. But because we change our requirements, we're actually going to spend $1.50 less. And that $1.50 less is core cost savings. And now cost avoidance is a little bit different. That's where we mentioned that the idea is that we're going to grow less. And so we're going to avoid 45% growth, but we're going to pay for 30% instead. And it's a very fair way to measure ROI in enterprises. This is something that I think that's very important to understand, is that enterprises understand tools, data, compliance all cost money. The thing that they have problems with is rapid growth. And you've all seen this, especially if you're in logging monitoring, you're typically seeing your logging rates, no matter what your tool is, growing 40% a year. And that escalator of cost is too much, because most businesses, when they're planning for IT spend, they're planning for 10 to 15% growth year over year in terms of how they're doing their budgeting. So if your needs are growing 45% and the budget is 15%, you got a big gap. And that's where you don't necessarily have to you don't necessarily have to spend less with a Splunk or Elastic, but you have to be able to control that spend and not grow as fast. And that's an important distinction. And also enterprises, this is something I've run into too many times, where you're logging so fast you outrun your license for the year, and then you're either forced to buy a new license. Executives hate, and I can't emphasize, hate unbudgeted spend. That's something that drives people nuts, because that means they probably have to go back to the CIO and say, we need money out of your slush fund to do something, and that pisses people off. And so this is something. So you want to avoid that unbudgeted spend and give yourself more predictability. And that's where, for me, example, bringing in Cribl Stream gave me the ability to not have to have unbudgeted spend. The other option, of course, is that you just start dropping a lot of logs and you create blind spots and you create risk. And it's amazing to me how many organizations get into this terrible choice of unbudgeted spend versus creating some sort of operational observability security blind spot. And it's a tough spot to be in. I think anyone who's on this webinar, you've been in this spot and you know what it's like. So you want to do everything you can to give yourself predictability and to give yourself stability. So why these distinctions matter? This is something that I made early on. I'm sitting in front of my VP and I go on and on about how we're going to be able to spend less money, when really it wasn't spending less money. And then this is where I didn't quite understand this, where we were just not growing as fast. And my VP was laughing, and I was like, well, what's so funny? He says, well, since you say we're gonna spend less, I'm going to cut your budget because you obviously don't need that money anymore. And because I didn't understand the concepts. And this is why I was very lucky to have leaders in my last job who would help me understand how to align engineering and how that engineering, that technical need, with business objectives, with business accounting, and how I'm not necessarily spending less money. I'm just not growing as fast. And I can say I was slightly panic stricken. This is another thing that happened before as well, where I said that, hey, I use the wrong words in saying, because we've automated this process, I've eliminated enough hours for an entire FTE. And so again, VP was laughing at me and said, so who are we going to fire? And so, what do you mean, who are we going to fire? Well, you've limited FTE. You don't need that FTE, so you don't need him anymore. So we got to fire him. And that's why it's just another thing that's important in terms of value. It's always about putting your time to value, toward business value. So that's another big thing with being able to do Cribl Stream. We're able to stop spending so much time on doing rote work, so much time on rolling. This is another thing, but that was a big deal with me with Stream. We didn't have to roll our cluster every time we needed to install props. We wasted so much time having to roll the cluster a couple of times a week, where doing it in Stream, we didn't have to do it. We could do it live. We could do it without a change window. And so we were able to have the engineering spend time doing more business value. So when you're having that sit down with your VP, the word you always want to say, and no matter what, is we're going to spend less time doing busy work, doing BAU work. We're going to spend more time delivering value to the business, because you never want to put yourself in a position where they ask you, so who are you going to fire? Because that's possibly the most uncomfortable conversation you can have. So let's go back. This is something I asked last year, and this is something I still think is relevant. How has the pandemic changed your budget planning for your organization? Has it become more chaotic? Has it become more disconnected? Or has it become better? I'm hoping it's become more clear, because I'm hoping organizations have spent more time communicating, more time organizing, have put in better tools for distributed planning, because everyone's working from all over the place. But I'm real curious what to see. I'm real curious what to see your thoughts are on this. And that's why I mentioned one of the choices about determining leadership priorities, because that was something that uncertainty, also estimating the future with these uncertain times. Those are all, problems. Asynchronous communication is another issue. We used to be pre-pandemic also be sitting in meetings all the time. So you had more synchronous communications because you're all sitting in meetings. But when you're not, and this is another thing, when you're sitting on Zoom, it's too easy to just zone out and do something else while everyone else is talking, where you just couldn't do that if you were in a meeting in an office. So I'm just really curious to see if, has the pandemic changed anything for you? Has it made it worse? Has it made it better?
Okay, the poll is open. We are starting to get some responses. So we'll wait a few seconds before we go ahead and close the poll. Any predictions here, Ed?
My guess is I get priorities and asynchronous communication.
Yeah. All right, we still have a couple more responses. We'll wait just a few more seconds. Yep.
I thank you for everyone's time. This isn't normally exactly the most exciting thing to talk about, but I think it's important. And I think this is something this is something I'm more than willing to do. Again, go over this in more detail because I just want to help give our community, give our engineers and architects more tools to grow. There you go. Yep. Hard to estimate the future with uncertain times. And that's true. I mean, right now, especially with economic issues, with inflation, see a lot of companies are going into lockdown mode right now in terms of spending, cutting travel, cutting training, cutting a lot of different spending, a lot of different spending priorities because they're afraid of what's going to happen in the future. And that creates a lot of planning issues because you said, what the problems are, but you need money, you need time to solve these problems. And that's where also that just making really solid budget proposals is so important. You'll see so many of your peers who will start making not so great, make not so great choices in terms of how they do their budget planning. And then you'll hopefully with this kind of help, you'll outshine them. So another type of new investment capability when you do budget planning is typically a new capability. Lots of enterprises will fund a new capability if they feel like they need it. This is a great benefit because you don't always necessarily have to save money to fund this, but you also want to try to attach this benefit to another investment category. In order, it's all about justification. But I'll say this probably 4 or 5 times, but you have to preserve your credibility as an engineer and architect. When you start doing budget proposals, you start raising your credibility in the enterprise, and you start raising your profile in the enterprise. It is so important to be credible, to be seen, to be honest, to be seen as not playing games and not be full of nonsense. And so just to try to be as credible and honest as possible. You're going to get a lot more respect by putting forth a solid proposal that is true, that's credible, that maybe they don't decide to adopt it, but at least they believe you, because that credibility is so important. And once you lose it, it's very, very hard to get back. Risk with a new capability, you need to have a very good reason adding a capability and not save money. It's incredibly important. So just always be thinking about, we need that new capability, and we're gonna scale staffing. We're gonna do something. Another great example: your organization decides to go to O365, so you need to be able to pull data in from O365, but you also into Splunk Cloud, but you also need to be able to send that same subsets of that same data to a tool like Exabeam or Securonics. Splunk tools are not going to support this use case because they're a closed loop. So you have a choice of either to build your own solution or purchase something like a Cribl Stream to solve this problem. That's an example of a new capability to solve a requirement. And so that's a fair way to start a budget conversation. Risk avoidance reduction. This is a favorite of mine. This is something that you should all be looking very, very carefully at. When you're handling security and operational monitoring, enterprise risk is a big factor. And so you start, especially if you're working in the security arena, you've seen enterprises who've had a breach due to a lack of logging, lack of monitoring, a lack of security controls. That can cost the enterprise hundreds of millions of dollars off its market cap. You've seen, for example, with Equifax, just monstrous amounts of money are lost. It's huge problems with disclosure. It's really, really expensive. And so from a risk perspective, the idea that we can avoid this, but it's you can't make these kind of assertions lightly. You have to be able to back this with data. And that's the risk, because risk can be hard to quantify. You have some organizations that may be a little immature who aren't willing to put a dollar number on risk, and so you're going to have to work with them. You're going to have to really spend a lot of time articulating the story of why risk reduction is important. Just to broaden the subject, so simple things like backup and retention can be a very, very good way in order to manage risk. Enterprises, especially regulated enterprises, have to retain a lot of data. Like healthcare, for example, PHI data retention could be 7 years plus the life of the payer. I mean, you can imagine trying, telling your storage guy, "Hey, yeah, I got to retain data for 100 years." And so those are the kind of things that there's an enormous amount of risk. Like, for example, as a healthcare provider, if you don't retain data badly enough, you could potentially lose access to things like Medicare and Medicaid. So that's something that can end an organization. At banks, I mean, you could have the comptroller of the United States say that you can't do business with other banks because you're not following the rules. I think what the SEC is going to start having these sort of requirements on publicly traded enterprises, and so the risk perspective of not retaining data, of not managing your data, of not following privacy laws can be very, very big. I think GDPR, I think it's 3 or 4% fine of a company's yearly profits, and so it can be a big number. So an example of risk avoidance is around GDPR. You need to ingest data that's in scope for GDPR controls, but you do not possess a tool required to depersonalize the data and make it safe to retain in your organization. You need a new capability to stay compliant with GDPR. And you have a weighing situation of how important is this capability to stay compliant with GDPR, and what's the risk of not doing it. And this from a political standpoint, this is the kind of you want to put your executives and your leadership to make this decision, because typically they're going to be pretty risk reluctant to take on risk, and more likely to fund your product if they believe what you're saying and if they believe the risk is big enough. And I've mentioned with the GDPR fines that it can get, it's something that can rapidly get out of control. Always remember, especially if you're working in a multinational, that there's more and more privacy laws all over the world. And so this is something that's spreading everywhere. You're even seeing these type of privacy laws in state to state in the United States. It's a massive pain, but it's also an opportunity for you to fund projects, use this to fund projects so you can get other things done. But work with your records teams, work with your compliance teams to understand this, use them to help you quantify risk. So this way that gives you another person to help you communicate the scope of risk to your business. Does anyone have any questions? I mean, this is a particularly important point for me. So if anyone has any questions or wants to ask, we can unmute if you want, because this is just something that I want to make sure I'm communicating it well. Scale staffing is another powerful reason to fund a project. It's a chronic problem all over the enterprise right now that cannot hire enough people. People are moving around. It's constant instability. Staffing is a massive issue, and so this is something I'm hoping that every good IT leader is looking at. Is we want to automate everything you do. And so this is the idea that we're going to put a new tool, a new process in place so that we're going to be able to spend less time doing something. And that way we'll spend more time doing more important things. The risk for this type of approach is staffing would be hard to quantify. I've actually heard some leaders consider staffing a sunk cost, and that just doesn't really care. And so that's why I have precise details. Understand how much the hourly work of every person on your staff costs. Be familiar with what typically called a fully weighted cost. So that's the employee's salary, also with their benefits, also with any kind of bonuses, and that's their fully weighted cost. And typically, what I do is I divide it by a 40-hour work week, 50 weeks a year. That comes out to about 2,000 hours, and then that way you can attach a dollar figure to everyone's hourly work, so you can use that to calculate, we're spending X amount of money on staffing now. If we do this, I can shift to this time to do something else. And that way, I think it's a very good, very solid way to do that. This is something that's going to appeal, and it typically is going to align with your organizational priorities. So an example of scale staffing, your backlog is full of logging requests you don't have time to get done. You either need more engineers or automation tools to get these requests done without adding new headcount. And also, for example, and this is something that really key to pick up on, if your backlog is full of requests, maybe you don't have the right data in Splunk. So this is a way that you can also make a risk reduction argument as well. So this is two enterprise value points that you can use as a way to give your project more importance. We're going back to also now important to tell a story. Executives don't want to talk about tools and want to talk about problems. And this is, if you don't take away anything from this, you don't ever lead off a discussion with a leader saying, we need this tool to do something. Because from a good architect's going to talk about business objectives, business priorities. Don't talk about tools. Talk about tools at the end. If you start talking about tools, if you lead off a conversation with executives about tools, my ugly face is going to come through the screen and remind you that, guys, it's super important. Don't talk about tools initially. Talk about pain, talk about requirements, talk about how this aligns with business objectives, set requirements about how we're going to solve this problem, and then say what tools are going to match to our requirements. It's just critically important. When you're having the conversation, always think about, why does the executive care? So let's talk about, like, from Splunk, for example, that you need to be able, say you need to be able to manage your Splunk licensing. You need to be able to slow down your growth. The executive's not going to care that working with props and transforms is kind of a pain in the butt, or that you need to get more data into Splunk and you can't. That's not what they care. What they care about is managing your budget. They care about, can you manage your growth? Can you lower your growth from 45% to 15%? Can you give an accurate forecast? Are you going to stop spending on unbudgeted money? And then finally, from a risk perspective, is the enterprise going to avoid risk by having the right data in Splunk? Those are business values. And then from there, you start talking about tools. You talk about how you're going to solve the problem. So that's the requirement statement. And also be ready to answer the question why you can't solve the problems with existing tools. Something we see all the time where people start talking about managing data in flight, and they say, why can't you use this? Why can't you build your own solution? Why can't we do this? Why can't we do that with this? And it's a very fair set of questions. Enterprises want to be able to manage their money, manage their time. If they already have a tool that'll solve this problem, then they want you to use that tool. So just be ready to answer that question. Also be ready to answer the question of, what if we just don't do anything? What's the answer there? And finally, what's the benefit of the business? What's the business outcome? So one thing I always had ready with me was, I had a ready set of 5 challenges I wanted to solve. I had have a little elevator pitch of 3 sentences or better for every problem. So if I was in a meeting and something came up, if I can't tell you how many times I was in a meeting where they said, we have funding freed up, and basically the first person to raise their hand gets it. So I always made sure I had the ability to raise my hand and say something intelligent as soon as possible. Don't need a book when in those situations, but it helps that it's top of mind, that your cost, your challenges, and that you can talk about it coherently. And I'll say it again, don't lead off these conversations with tools. Talk about pain, talk about requirements, talk about business outcomes. So let's go back into a little bit of more elements of a budget proposal. What's the problem? Have that problem. What's the technical and business pain? Requirements on how to solve the business pain. Address why you can't solve it with existing tools. Just kind of a little story. This is something that, before I found Cribl, we try to address this with things like Apache NiFi and Kafka. And the issues were, it wasn't that the tools couldn't do it. They were simply required too much time for a small team to solve these problems effectively. And that came back to the part of the business pain of, I need an enormous amount of time. I need dedicated developers. I need more headcount to use these tools to solve this pain, where I can buy something, I can get these challenges solved in a fraction of the time and cost less. And that's where then we'll show it in terms of your TCO analysis of how to demonstrate that. But it's important just to understand those differences and why it matters, because your time does matter in any enterprise. The engineering time is the most valuable resource. It's a constraint for everything, and everything you can do to solve time and get things that are important to the business done really matters. This is something that I'm always curious about in terms of thinking. I see some pretty big companies, they'll build their own logging system, they'll build their own storage system. And it boggles my mind that how much time it took to build what should be a commodity. And instead of saying that, like if I'm Pinterest, for example, I need you to send my wife better recipes. If I'm Uber, I need, better app to get me cars, to get me a ride in a faster time. That you'll spend enormous thousands of engineering hours trying to build your own logging system, something I really don't understand. And so those are the kind of things that you just have to think about. When you start, after you get past the initial elements, then you start talking about, here's our requirements. What tools could possibly solve your requirements? You always want to get more than one. Again, it's incredibly important to be credible. Have at least 2 options, if not 3 options, that you can compare and contrast. Get ready to, once you do your POVs and do your compare and contrast, describe the ROI, including money saved or cost avoided. and describe what will happen if the project is not funded. You want to be super clear if the project is not funded. Retention is a good place to start, where you can say, if we don't fund our retention project, we're going to be in violation of this, and this is what could happen. You want to put your leaders to the decision of, are you willing to absorb this risk if this is not done? So we're going to have a couple examples of telling a story, and that's why it's just tell a story that's relatable. It also includes your business outcomes. Like, for example, our data volume is growing 45% year over year. We keep running out of storage until mid-year, impacting the business because we have to spend unbudgeted money to buy more licenses and storage. And that's something that's a great sentence. It's concise. It states the problem, and it states a problem that the executives hate. Something drove my leaders nuts when we first got started, because we were running out of storage. Coming on, it's like, hey, we're out. I don't know what else to do. Either we have to drop security logging that security needs, or we got to spend more money. And so, I look like an ass, and my executive says I'm going to look like an ass when I go ask for more money. Because the idea is that we're expected to plan for this. And that's what, and my response is, I don't know how to plan for something that we don't have the tools to control. So this is where you break down your business outcomes, and we need to be able to precisely filter incoming data, so we only log required data to slow growth and provide stable year-to-year forecasting. And that's where I'm solving a business challenge. And then finally, who says, we don't have a capability, our current logging vendor does not provide these tools to adequately manage our data. You know what I'm doing? I'm not talking about vendors. I'm talking about capabilities. I'm talking about the problems. I'm talking about the pain. Then we say, after competitive testing, so that's where we have our 2 to 3 solutions. We determined that Cribl Stream is the only option that meets our requirements to lower growth and provide the ability to accurately forecast hardware and license. That second part of the sentence is key, because that relates that we've done testing, we've compared vendors, we've picked a vendor, and then this is what it provides us. So we've related all the important elements in one sentence. Then we make it's what I call the money statement. We're going to be able to lower our growth. We're going to be able to get the right data into Splunk. We're going to be able to give a stable long-term forecast. And those are all the things they want to hear. And then finally, we give the bad news. If we don't do this, we're going to have to budget an additional $1.2 million to handle expected growth. And so it's just, again, always important. When you're trying to make a proposal, you want to make it a binary situation. You do this, it's good. You do this, it's bad. So we lay out a couple of, and then we're going to switch over and then kind of go through some really basic ROI calculators. This is a basic budget proposal. So this is a mixture of risk and licensing. We have too much data. So from a risk perspective, we're not getting the right security data into Splunk due to hardware license engineering constraints. I add a little that, we have 110 intakes into the backlog, just to kind of illustrate how much risk is available. 50% year-over-year growth, unplanned spend. And then we don't have the right automation to spend. You wouldn't have the right automation available to fix this problem from the vendor. So the idea is that we don't have an existing tool to handle this. Then I set up my requirements. And this is where we come out with a 1-page business outcome. And this is another, just if you haven't done this before, you want to be very concise. When you go into budgeting meetings, they're going to look at one slide. You're typically dealing with an audience that has fairly short attention span. So you want to make sure you're going to be very, very concise about what you're saying, that you're delivering this information and you're hitting on what they care about as concisely as possible. I like this format because it gives you that case for change. It has an investment category. It has your milestones and roadmap up here. And this is something that we're going to share with everyone so you can use it yourself. Up here is where I would put a screenshot of how your business unit handles financials. Like in my business unit is basically a 3-year breakdown of costs. So that way they could see our year-to-year costs, what's our cost over 3 years. And it was pretty basic. I've seen other companies do wildly complicated things in terms of chargebacks, business units, paybacks to the business. And so that's why I left this blank, because in order to fit what you're doing. So important to start with investment categories, keep the lights on, new capabilities, new revenue streams, regulatory and compliance. Have, if you can, two categories is better than one. Talk about your case for change. Always keep it high level. Always talk about why the business cares. The project summary is a really good way to lay this out point by point. What does your audience care about? More often than not, your SVP of your unit or potentially your CIO are all sitting in this meeting, so you want to definitely get their attention. Do you want to have any questions about this kind of format? I mean, most companies already have their own format, so you want to use whatever your company's doing. I just want to give you an example of how to communicate this. Cheryl's going to send out an email to everyone that contains this slide deck. It's also going to contain these slides, so that way you can have this. You can have this for when you want to put your budget forward. So, I'm going to lay out some basic starters with your investment category. Set the tone with the investment category in order to get their attention about why this is important. Case for change. Again, we come back, got to tell a story. Use your project summary to then communicate the bullet points of business value, who's going to do this work and when it's going to get done. And for key financials, go ahead and use. So try use the templates that we're going to provide you, or hopefully your organization has one, in order to calculate your basic total cost of ownership and return on investment. And then you got the summary of value. So I'm going to switch over. So let's pull up some slides. So this is a really basic way of trying to understand your total cost of ownership for your core platform, and that if you make these changes, what you're going to do. So these are largely made up costs. They're somewhat accurate, but not exactly. So say with Splunk, say I got a 2 terabyte license, so it's on-prem, it's going to cost you, $230, $240 a year. So I just rounded up to $500,000 to make it easier for 2 terabytes. From a storage perspective, and this is also, always know your numbers. I carry this around in my head all the time because snagging hardware was my specialty. And so it's always important to know how much your things cost. Here's your breakdowns in terms of hot and cold. Here's what I'm paying. Here's what my syslog servers cost. Another thing to be aware of, especially if you're working on-prem, is the difference between OpEx and CapEx. Typically, your syslog and your heavy forwarders, syslog servers, your heavy forwarder servers are all going to be VMs, and so that's an OpEx expense because you're going to charge back to the VM team. So you're going to have a different set of costs. And then your Splunk servers, I mean, if you're lucky, are all physical, so they're going to have a CapEx cost. So always keep in mind with the business how that's going to work. I always think your operational costs are year to year, where your CapEx costs are going to be amortized over time. And so typically with business accounting, they're going to look at your CapEx costs in a much different way than your OpEx costs. You're going to have much easier access, but you can only spend CapEx, that's called capital expenses, on things like hardware, on physical things. You're not going to typically spend CapEx on software. You're not going to spend it on people. But it's a glorious thing if you're running in a data center because you can get a lot more hardware than you think. Because I'm running on-prem, I don't have any egress costs. And here's where I started calculating time. So I calculated $60 per hour hour a year. So 10 hours a week. So that's $31,200 on spending on syslog server administration. Or Splunk reshaping and admin data, things like that. So I'm planning 40 hours a week. So it's all the props and transforms. That's all your onboarding of data. That's all your admin work. I mean, that's included. I mean, for example, every time you write props and transforms, a lot of times you're going to have to roll your indexers or roll your search heads. And so that time period should also be included here. You want to be real specific about each type of task. It helps if you can track this in like an agile system like that in order to be more precise, because I think a lot of leaders want to see that you've done your homework. You typically don't like swag, and so you want to try to use your work management system that's in your enterprise to document these things. And so now we start laying out my future yearly cost, so that if I put Cribl Stream in place, my license isn't going to grow. I'm going to be able to use less storage. I'm going to be able to use, less hardware. And then you really see where I'm going to use 50% less admin time. So you can see that this is very basic and there's a lot more nuance to this. But just from a staffing and hardware and software, I could save $228,000 a year if I make this change. And just to give you an example, like Splunk Stream, I believe the list price for on-prem Splunk Stream is going to run about $84 a year. Of course, you're always going to get discounts from that, but you see, you're going to have a clear cost savings if you do this by going to Splunk Stream. There's a few other things here that are really important to keep in mind, that it's not just if I make this change, we're going to, $220,000. The other change is you're also looking at, I'm going to be able to redeploy all this admin time. I'm going to be able to redeploy it to do something else. Think about your observability projects. Think about all your other business projects that you need time on. So it's not just that 228. It's also going to be the value of being able to redeploy so much time. So that's 20 hours a week to do something else. And so that can have enormous value to the enterprise. So don't let that go. Also think about different from a data perspective, that, hey, because we're saving a little money here, we can then maybe use this money to increase our retention to meet requirements, or we can bring in other data sets. And so those are other ways to quantify value. The most common thing I see with Stream is that I rarely see companies log less. What I see them is log more effectively and grow small and then grow slower. So always talk about that value. Of we've gotten rid of the junk. We're logging more valuable data. We're making our Splunk investment more valuable. We're getting more results, and then work on quantifying that. But don't ever just stop at that 228 as the value of making a change. Do anyone have any questions? Is any that all clear? Because I think there's more key points in terms of, as you build your business case, what's important and other ways to look at your value. Now we start looking at your TCO and your RIO. And so what I did was, I just built in 25% growth CAGR. So you go back to your other sheet, we're looking at 1.4 million a year with our existing business. And with 25% growth, you're looking at 1.7, 2.2. Over 3 years, that's 5.3 million. And so this is another way to create value. So with Stream, let's put this all out. Let's do this a little live here. So I'm going to add 5% growth into my mechanism. Back in here. So let's go back to other sheet. All right, so 1.183 is where we're going to start year one. Say we're going to lower this, so we're going to grow by 5%. So this is the idea, is that you want to add 5%. I'll do the Excel calculations when we add this up. So we're looking at 1.2. My math may be wrong, but it's still the same idea here. That's the idea, is they're looking at, so we're going to go from 25% to 5% growth. And that's where you start building your budget number. So it's not just the year to year, but it's over 3 years. We've knocked off about 1.3 million. We've knocked about 1.3 million off our 3-year budget. And that's real money for an enterprise. And so I just hope this makes sense in terms of your life cycle, how you quantify it. This is something, for example, that I would screenshot something like this and then put it over into the key financials up here in this space. And the key financials up in this space. Whoops, it's not where we want to go. I put it here. So that way you're telling your 3-year story and you're able to show how you've saved over $1 million but you're getting the right data. You're not losing capabilities. You're gaining capabilities while you're saving money. You're also solving risk. So that tells a story of how you're adding a new capability. You're scaling your staffing. You're lowering your risk, and you're saving money all at the same time. It makes for a very, very powerful story. But that's why it's so important to tell a story. Don't talk about the technical. Talk about the story and why the business matters. So we're going to get this together. I'm going to fix an error I just noticed in my spreadsheet, and then we'll send this out to everyone. And I hope this helps. So please give us some feedback. If everyone has any questions, I have plenty of time. If you want to go over something, also I'm in the Cribl community. So if anyone wants to talk about this, I'm more than happy to go through this one-on-one and to help you with these processes, because this is such an important skill to learn. This is how you get promoted. This is how you get to architect, staff, senior. This is how you get up. It's all about herding the cats and making your ideas a reality. Anyone have any questions? Anything I do to help? We can unmute too if someone has any questions. Well, I think that's it. So Cheryl, I really appreciate it, and we'll get an email and we'll get the video out to everyone shortly. And we really want to thank you for everyone's time. I know this is not the most exciting topic, but I hope it helps in your professional development.
Great. And I think we have one more poll, right, that we're going to be.
Oh, that's right. Yes, we do. We certainly do. So, and let's say, are you interested in adding Cribl Stream to your budget plan? Is this something that we can also offer a demo? We can offer demos. We can offer meetings. We can talk about requirements. Also, don't forget about Cribl Edge. I think Cribl Edge is particularly exciting.
All right. So while we get that poll going, we're going to go ahead and transition over to our Q&A section. So as Ed said, feel free to let us know any questions you may have about what was presented today. We will be sending out a follow-up email with the amazing assets that Ed shared. But in the meantime, I think we do have a couple of questions, Ed. The first one is around what you meant that there's a difference between cost savings and cost avoidance. Can you just maybe go into that a little bit more in detail in terms of why this matters?
You bet. And I think these are critical differences. So cost savings is when I'm spending $1 million this year, and next year I will spend $900,000. So and that's where, I've renewed. So my current Splunk license is $1 million a year. I'm going to renew it next year for $900,000. That's a cost savings. I'm logging less. I'm doing less. I'm going to spend less. Cost avoidance is when I'm going to avoid a future spend. And this is a critical distinction. So, and this is typically when we're working with users with Splunk or Elastic or whatever, is that without Cribl Stream, you're going to grow 45%, 45% year over year. So that million is 1.45 million next year without Cribl Stream. But with Cribl Stream, I can grow 15%. So I'll go 1.15 million. So I've avoided a $300,000 cost by Cribl Stream. So I'm not saving money because I'm still spending more money next year than I'm spending this year, but I'm not spending as much. And that's what cost avoidance is.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. The next one is around providing an example of more than one value add for a new budget proposal. An example could be like scaling staffing and saving money. How would that proposal work?
Well, and that's why I want to mention that in terms of the scenario that we ran through, in that. So let's go back to the scenario. Where did it go? Oh yeah, here we go. All right. And this is where it's important to help. And so in terms of the investment categories, and this is also a little bit different in every enterprise, but you're going to have risk management, you're going to have a new capability, you're going to have a staffing angle, and you're going to have a saving money angle. And that's the idea is this project is going to achieve one of these four business outcomes. And that's why it's a project that can address multiple business outcomes is so important. And so saving money, I think that's straightforward. So either cost savings or cost avoidance, scale staffing so that I can automate and I can get more work done with the same number of people. And it's also this, and at least if you have my leaders, they'll laugh at you when you say I can get more done with less time, and then they'll ask you who to fire. And so you're always going to say I can scale staffing to get more important work done with the same number of people. Capability that say you need a new capability and that you don't have, and we have to pay for it. So that's typically going to be the toughest because there's none of those budgetary business savings that are in that new capability, but it's something worth talking about. And then finally, risk management. Risk is a really broad category, but it's really important, especially focus on security, compliance, audit. Those are all issues. Also, the risk of, say, I'm not logging the right data to monitor my applications. That's a risk because your applications aren't fully monitored. And so it can be tough to quantify, and that's why it's important to document what you're doing. Just say, for example, we are not getting 4 of our 10 types of security data into Splunk, so we're creating a security blind spot, which enhances the risk for a breach, which could cost us X number of dollars. So that's the kind of logic you want to use to make sure you provide supporting documentation of when you attach a value to risk. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm more than happy to talk to anyone where it doesn't.
Great. Well, thank you, Ed. I don't see any additional comments in the Q&A. I have a feeling that once people get the documents, they may have some additional questions. So what's the best way for them to reach out on Cribl community?
At Cribl community, so cribl.io/community, sign up for our Slack community. We got about 5,000 users right now. I'm very active on social media, so look at Twitter. So it's eBailey1367. In terms of an email address, ed@cribl.io. And also, if you're working with sales, speak with your salespeople, and they can pull me into a conversation. Because this is not just a Cribl stream aspect. This is just something I feel it's important for anyone who's looking to figure out budgeting, who's looking to grow their profile in the enterprise, and also solve problems. I think we're all at heart engineers. We want to solve problems, but in any enterprise, you need budget to solve problems. And so this is want to help you do that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Ed, for a great presentation today and for sharing the details on how to use your budget proposal to tell a story that includes how to map technical requirements to business objectives, explaining to executives why they should fund your project, and how best to present your data. And thanks to all of you for attending our webinar today. Remember, we will be sending out the resources Ed shared during the webinar in just a few days. We hope to see you at our next webinar on October the 18th, titled Inside the Mind of a Hacker, where we'll be speaking with a hacker turned cybersecurity expert, Sammy Kamkar. You can visit us at cribl.io/events to register. So thanks again, Ed. Thanks again to everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. I really appreciate everyone's time.